The wind didn't howl on Glacium. It screamed. Long, violent shrieks that tore across the frozen mountains like something alive and angry. Rena pressed her forehead against the frosted window of her workshop, watching white curtains of snow obscure everything beyond 30 meters. The thermometer outside read -43 degrees. A mild evening, by local standards. She turned back to her workbench, where the dismantled parts of a heating coil lay scattered across oil-stained metal. The soldering iron hummed in her hand as she reconnected a severed wire. Living alone on the edge of civilization meant being able to fix everything yourself. No repair crews ventured this far into the Glacium highlands. No supply runs during storm season. Just Rena, her tools, and the endless white. She preferred it that way. 3 years ago, she'd left the orbital stations behind. Too many voices, too many eyes, too many questions about why she never smiled anymore. The mountains didn't care about her past. They didn't ask why a woman barely 30 had chosen exile over community. They simply existed, cold and honest and brutal. The heating coil sparked to life under her careful hands. She smiled faintly, setting it aside to cool. Outside, the storm intensified. Ice crystals rattled against the reinforced walls of her shelter, like tiny fingers trying to get in. That's when she heard it. Scratch, scratch. Rena froze, her hand hovering over the soldering iron. The sound was soft, almost buried beneath the wind's fury. She tilted her head, listening. Nothing, just. The storm got she returned to her work. Scratch, scratch. There. It was again. Deliberate, rhythmic, coming. From the outer door, Rena set down her tools and crossed to the security panel. The external camera showed nothing but swirling white. The motion sensors were silent. Probably just ice buildup, she told herself. Or debris caught in the wind. But something made her pause. The scratching came again, weaker this time. More desperate, her hand moved to the door controls before her brain caught up. Every survival instinct screamed at her to ignore it. Opening the door during a whiteout was suicide. Whatever was out there could be an animal, could be dangerous, could be nothing at all. Scratch, scratch. Rena pressed the button. The airlock hissed open in stages. First the inner seal, then the outer. Wind exploded into the small space, bringing needles of ice that stung her face. She raised her arm against the onslaught, squinting into the storm. Nothing. No one. Then she looked down. Footprints. Bare footprints in the snow, already filling with fresh powder. They led from somewhere in the whiteout to her door, then staggered away toward the rocks. Human-shaped, but the toes were too long. The stride was wrong. Rena's heart hammered. She grabbed her thermal coat from the hook and stepped into the storm. The cold hit her like a physical blow. Even with the coat's heating elements, the wind found every gap, every seam. She followed the tracks, one hand trailing along the shelter's wall to keep her bearings. 15 meters. 20. The prints were erratic now, weaving like someone drunk or dying. A dark shape huddled against a boulder. Rena lunged forward, dropping to her knees. It was a person, or something like one. A figure curled into itself, wrapped in what looked like strips of burned fabric. No coat, no gloves. Skin exposed to the killing cold. "Hey!" Rena shouted over the wind. "Can you hear me?" The figure didn't move. Rena reached out, touching a shoulder. The flesh beneath was ice-cold and faintly scaled. Not human. She pulled the figure's face into the light of her headlamp. A woman. Or female, at least. Her skin was a pale lavender, almost translucent in places. High cheekbones, delicate features, lips blue with hypothermia. Her hair, long and dark, was frozen in tangles around her face. When Rena's light hit her closed eyelids, she saw they were silver beneath the lids, like mercury under thin skin, viridian. Rena recognized the species from her station days. They were rare this far from the core systems. Rare and usually traveling with their family clans. This one was alone. Rena didn't think. Couldn't afford to. She hooked her arms under the woman's shoulders and dragged her upright. The alien was light, too light, all bones and desperate shivers. Together, they stumbled back toward the shelter, Rena following her own rapidly disappearing footprints. The airlock had never felt so far away. They collapsed through the door. Rena slapped the control panel, and the seals hissed shut, cutting off the storm's roar. Sudden silence pressed against her ears. She gasped, her lungs burning from the cold, and looked down at the woman sprawled across her floor dot, still breathing. Barely. Rena worked fast. She stripped away the burned rags, trying not to look too closely at the scars beneath. Old burns, deliberate patterns. Not from cold, from fire. She grabbed every blanket she owned and wrapped them around the woman's skeletal frame, then cranked the shelter's heater to maximum. The woman's lips moved. A whisper, so soft Rena almost missed it. Why? Rena leaned closer. What? Why? Didn't you leave me? The silver eyes cracked open, unfocused and glassy. They stared at Rena with something that looked like confusion. Like the concept of rescue was foreign. Because you knocked, Rena said simply. And I don't ignore people who knock. The woman's eyes closed again. Her breathing evened out slightly, though she still shivered beneath the blankets. Rena sat back on her heels, her own hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. What had she just brought into her home? Who was this woman? And what had she been running from that made her choose a frozen death over whatever lay behind? The shelter's heater hummed, pushing warm air through the vents. Outside, the storm continued its endless assault on the mountains. Inside, for the first time in 3 years, Rena wasn't alone. She watched the woman sleep, counting each breath like a small victory against the cold. In the morning, there would be questions. There would be complications. There would be decisions to make. But tonight, all that mattered was that someone had scratched at her door, and she had opened it. The woman stirred in her sleep, one hand reaching out from beneath the blankets. Her fingers were long and elegant, the nails filed to points. On her wrist, Rena saw more scars. Chains, maybe. Or shackles. Whatever this woman's story was, it had been written in pain. Rena pulled another blanket from her storage locker and tucked it carefully around the sleeping form. Then she settled into her chair, positioned between the woman and the door, just in case. Outside, the wind screamed its lonely song. Inside, 2 women who had chosen isolation for very different reasons began an unexpected journey toward something neither had believed possible. Any more. Trust. The dawn came slowly to Glacium, turning the sky from black to gray to pale silver. Rena hadn't slept. She'd spent the night watching the woman breathe, monitoring her temperature, and occasionally adding another log to the small heating stove in the corner. The flames danced hypnotically, casting orange shadows across the metal walls. The woman woke with a gasp. Her silver eyes snapped open, wild and disoriented. She tried to sit up too quickly and immediately cried out, her body seizing with pain. Rena moved forward slowly, hands raised. Easy, she said softly. You're safe. You're inside. The woman's gaze darted around the room, taking in the walls, the fire, the door, and finally landing on Rena. Recognition flickered across her face. Memory of the storm, the cold, the moment she'd been pulled from death's grip. You, she whispered, her voice like gravel. You brought me in. You were dying, Rena said, as if that explained everything. The woman stared at her for a long moment, then slowly pushed herself up to sitting. The blankets fell away from her shoulders, revealing the network of scars that covered her lavender skin. She noticed Rena's gaze and immediately pulled the blankets back up, shame crossing her features. "I'm Rena," the human said, pretending not to notice. "What's your name?" The woman hesitated. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Silith." "Silith," Rena repeated, tasting the name. "Are you hungry?" Silith's eyes widened slightly, as if the question itself was suspicious. Yes." Rena moved to her small kitchenette and began heating a pot of broth. She could feel Silith watching her every movement, tense and ready to bolt despite her weakened state. Like a wild animal caught in a trap, still deciding whether to chew off its own leg. "How long was I outside?" Silith asked. "I don't know. But based on your condition, I'd guess at least 3 days. Maybe 4. 4 nights, Silith corrected quietly. I counted them." Rena turned, ladle in hand. "You survived 4 nights in that storm? Without shelter?" "I had fire," Silith said, then laughed bitterly. "For a while. I burned everything I had. My cloak, my shirt, even part of my pants. Piece by piece, just to keep moving." She looked down at her hands. "On the 4th night, I had nothing left to burn. So I walked until I found your light." "You knocked on my door," Rena said. "I knocked on 3 doors," Silith admitted. "Yours was the only one that opened." The words hung in the air between them. Rena felt anger rise in her chest, hot and unexpected. Someone else had heard Silith's desperate scratching and chosen to stay in the dark. Had chosen to let her die rather than face whatever complications an alien refugee might bring. "Well," Rena said, her voice harder than she intended, "you're here now. And you're not going back out there." Silith's eyes met hers, searching for something. Deception, maybe. Hidden motives. When she found none, confusion replaced suspicion. "Why would you help me?" "You don't know me." Rena poured the broth into a cup and brought it over. "Does that matter?" "In my experience, yes." Silith took the cup with both hands, holding it close to her face and breathing in the steam. "Kindness always has a price. Not here." "Everywhere," Silith countered, but she sipped the broth anyway. Her eyes closed in relief. "It's warm. That's generally how soup works," Rena said with a small smile. "No," Silith opened her eyes. "I mean it's warm without hurting. Where I come from, warmth is punishment." Rena frowned. "What do you mean?" Silith set down the cup and slowly unwrapped one of the blankets from around her torso. She turned slightly, revealing her back. The scars Rena had glimpsed earlier were worse than she'd thought. Deliberate burns, patterns, and symbols seared into flesh. Some were old and faded. Others looked more recent. "Fire is a tool of discipline among my people," Silith said quietly. "We're taught from childhood to fear heat, to associate it with pain and shame. These marks," she touched one gently, ... "These are reminders of every time I failed to be obedient." Rena felt her throat tighten. "Who did this to you?" "My family." Silith pulled the blanket back around herself. Viridian clans are matriarchal, strict. The eldest females hold absolute power, and those of us born into lower ranks must earn our worth through service. I was bonded to a clan leader's daughter as her personal attendant. When I displeased her, she used fire to correct me. "That's not correction," Rena said, her voice sharp. "That's torture." Silith looked at her with surprise. "You say that like it's obvious." "Because it is. Not to my people." Silith picked up the cup again, warming her hands. "I learned to fear heat more than anything. More than cold. More than hunger. So when I escaped and found myself in this storm, I thought dying in the ice would be better than burning again." She laughed softly, without humor. But then I started freezing, and I realized dying is dying. It all hurts the same. Rena sat down across from her. How did you escape? We were traveling through this system, stopping at one of the mining colonies to trade. I was sent to inventory supplies in the cargo hold, and I just ran. I stole a transport pod and crashed it in these mountains. I've been walking ever since. They'll be looking for you. I know. Silith's hands tightened around the cup. But I'd rather die free and frozen than live one more day as someone's property. Rena studied her for a long moment. There was steel beneath Silith's fragile appearance, a strength that had carried her through 4 nights of impossible cold, a will that refused to break even when burned and beaten. You won't die, Rena said finally. Not on my watch. Silith met her eyes. You can't promise that. Watch me. Something shifted in Silith's expression. Not quite trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of hope that the day passed slowly. Rena went about her usual routines, checking equipment, monitoring weather patterns, making small repairs. Silith watched everything with fascination, particularly the way Rena used fire. The heating stove, the soldering iron, the small cooking flame. Each time Rena worked near heat, Silith tensed, but never looked away. You're not afraid of it, Silith observed in the afternoon. Rena glanced up from her work. The fire? No. Should I be? Everyone should be. Fire is just a tool, Rena said. She set down her soldering iron and walked to the heating stove. Look, if I respect it, understand it, use it carefully. It keeps me alive. She held her hand near the flames, close but not touching. But if I'm careless or cruel with it, then yes, it becomes dangerous. Silith stood slowly and approached the stove. She stopped several feet away, her body rigid. Come here, Rena said gently. I can't. Yes, you can. I'm right here. Silith took one step forward, then another. Her breathing quickened as she got closer to the heat. Rena could see sweat forming on her forehead, despite the relatively mild temperature. That's good, Rena encouraged. Just a little closer. Silith took one more step and stopped, trembling. She was now standing beside Rena, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from the stove. It's not hurting you, Rena said softly. I know, Silith whispered. But my body doesn't believe it. Rena slowly extended her hand toward the flames again, demonstrating the safe distance. Your body learned to protect you. That's not weakness. That's survival. But now you're safe, and you can teach it something new. Silith stared at the fire, her silver eyes reflecting orange light. Slowly, so slowly, she lifted her hand. It shook violently as she moved it toward the warmth. When she was still a foot away from where Rena's hand hovered, she stopped. I can feel it, she breathed. Warmth without pain. Yes. Tears began sliding down Silith's cheeks. She held her hand there for nearly a minute, just feeling gentle heat against her scarred palm. When she finally lowered her arm, she was crying in earnest. I didn't think this was possible, she said through tears. I didn't think I could ever feel warmth as anything but punishment. Rena acted on instinct. She pulled Silith into a gentle embrace, careful of her injuries. Silith stiffened initially, then slowly relaxed, her face pressed against Rena's shoulder. You're not property, Rena murmured. You're not broken. And you're not alone anymore. Silith's arms came up hesitantly, then wrapped around Rena's waist. She held on like someone drowning, finally finding solid ground. They stood there for a long time, two women who had fled their pasts finding unexpected sanctuary in each other. Outside, the wind had calmed. The storm was passing, but inside the small shelter, something warmer than any fire had begun to kindle. When they finally pulled apart, Silith wiped her eyes and gave Rena a trembling smile. "Thank you," she said, "for opening your door, for not turning off your lights." Rena smiled back. "Thank you for knocking." That evening, they sat together near the fire. Silith still kept her distance, but she no longer flinched at every flicker of flame. Rena told her about life in the mountains, about why she'd chosen isolation. Silith shared small stories of her homeworld, carefully avoiding the painful parts. As the artificial lights dimmed to simulate night, Silith grew quiet. "What is it?" Rena asked. "I'm afraid to sleep," Silith admitted. "Afraid I'll wake up and this will have been a dream. That I'll be back in the cold, or worse, back with them." Rena reached over and gently took Silith's hand. The Viridian's fingers were longer than hers, more delicate, but they fit together perfectly. "I'll be here when you wake up," Rena promised. "I'm not going anywhere." Silith squeezed her hand, then slowly lay down on the makeshift bed Rena had prepared. She kept holding Rena's hand even as her eyes drifted closed. Rena watched her sleep, feeling something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. She'd come to Glacium to be alone, to escape connection and all its complications. But sitting here, holding the hand of a woman who'd survived the impossible, she realized something. Some complications were worth it. Some doors were meant to be opened. And sometimes, the person you save ends up saving you right back.